exactly the same as the previous case that he was sentenced on, 19 GS 004918, and this court presided over that trial, and that sentencing was February 20th. And the victim in that case, a public defender employee, said the same thing. She wanted protection. And in that case, the sentence was probation, 5 months jail, 57 hours of community service. But that sentence has been stayed since the defendant filed an appeal. This case, though, involved something. It involved St. James Catholic School. It involved an 8th grade girl that's the daughter of an acquaintance of Mr. Brandt, and Mr. Brandt saw fit to involve himself in that situation with that school where he had absolutely no business. And the message that he left for Principal Havel Ginth was, "Hello, Principal Havel, you better call me back." He gave his phone number, and he said, "And when you do call me back, which of course you will, you're going to tell me that that little girl gets to come back to your school where she's loved and where she is getting a good education, because little Catholic bitches like you don't get to do something you don't like. And if you don't fucking do it, then get ready for a surprise, because I will something your school every fucking day with derogatory signs to protest your actions. And there's not a fucking thing you can do about it. So if you don't want to make shit real ugly, and I can make shit real ugly, you better do the right thing." So that's what he did in this case. And then, as we saw in the video during the trial, he got into the minivan of his acquaintance with this 8-year-old girl in the back seat, and he handed her the phone, and it was his YouTube channel. And he was having people call in, communicate with the school. But again, the emphasis is that this was something that he had absolutely no business even being involved in.
Yeah, I get it. Actually. But that's not for him to judge.
And I can hear Mr. Brandt
everybody
explaining my comments right now. Judge, at the last sentencing, which was February 20th, and we were in the courtroom at that time, and at that sentencing, Mr. Brandt stood before the court and he cried, and he turned around and he looked at all his friends in the courtroom, all probably some of the same people that are on the call today, and he said to them words to the effect of, "I am not your leader." And he seemed to maybe step away from his role as a public intimidator, or doing all the different things that we know so well that he does. And then he apologized to Ms. Valdez in that case, and he promised to do some community service sort of personally for her, which I'm not aware that he has done. Again, that sentence is stayed during the appeal. But I think it's important for the court to consider whether or not that apology was sincere. And I think we can tell, and I would say from his behavior today, but also from his behavior since the day of that sentencing that we know about, that he's not disavowing any of his behavior. Today, on the call, when somebody was showing the court the middle finger in a couple of different ways, it was Eric Brandt that spoke on that person's behalf and telling her to get over it, and some other things that he said. And then at a previous hearing in this case, Eric Brandt used a screensaver of a Nazi swastika. So he's still embracing and endorsing.
You're a liar.
The same. Well, I'll display it. I have it right here. I'm going to share my screen. I'd like to speak.
Mr. Solomon, I remember Solomon. Mr. Brandt, you will have your opportunity to speak. So if you want to slow.
Okay.
Mr. Brandt,
you will have your opportunity. Mr. Solomon, a goddamn liar, because that's what he is.
Mr. Brandt, if you'll listen to the court, you will have an opportunity to speak after your attorney has spoken on your behalf.
I just want to make sure that you know, get the chance to speak.
I remember the last court appearance. This court is very in tune with what takes place in this courtroom. So I don't need to see a screensaver.
Okay. It was right above the name Eric Brandt in the same square. And that's what I'm talking about, just his reaction today and his use of these kinds of things. And so this is what he does. He tries to intimidate. He's just nothing more than a bully. And at this point, the only real purpose for a sentence is protection for the public. It's public safety. His victims, that's the first thing they all say that they want. That's the most important thing to them, is being protected from him. In this case, what we can do is a protection order or an area restriction for St. James Catholic School, which has remained in place. But, Judge, I thought about asking the court for a significant number of community service hours, but frankly, the thought of him going into a nonprofit like Salvation Army or the Denver Animal Shelter, I wouldn't want to do that to the employees there or the animals at an animal shelter. I wouldn't trust him. I don't think the people that work there would trust him. I don't think anybody working around him would feel safe, and I don't think that would be a good purpose. So, Your Honor, at the last sentencing, we went through that pre-sentence report, and I went through it again, and I counted approximately 20 convictions for Mr. Brandt over the years. Anybody else, Judge, I think would get the maximum jail sentence, and that's what I think is the most appropriate sentence, and frankly, the only appropriate sentence. So I'm asking the court for the maximum jail sentence in this case, and I'm also asking that the court enter a protection order so that he remain at least 100 yards away. Frankly, I think it should be longer. I think it should be about 500 yards away from St. James School and all employees of the school.
What? Ever? This guy's ridiculous.
So that's what I have right now, Your Honor.
That's enough.
Mr. Burden?
Yes, Judge. I think it's interesting that Mr. Solomon talked about almost everything except for this case. He referred to other cases, he referred to Mr. Brandt's statements in other places. And I think I know why, because all they could say about Mr. Brandt in this case is that they recited some speech of his. Speech. There's no actions they can point to that he did anything harmful to anybody, just because of his speech. And in trial, what I remember, they had one phone call saying that if they didn't, they were going to protest if they didn't reinstate this little girl. And let's see who was in this case, who was the unreasonable party in this case. And I'm really actually quite shocked by this conviction. What happened on that day was Mr. Brandt was minding his own business, walking by the school. He had a sign, which they may not have liked the words to, but were perfectly legal. And little Marissa saw Mr. Brandt and waved to him. And then the teacher violently grabbed her to try and take her away from Mr. Brandt. And her guardian and grandfather went and tried to take her home, and they tried to refuse to give her his own ward to him. At that point, he insisted, and then they summarily expelled Marissa, whatever language they want to give to it. Not only did they expel this little girl, they excommunicated her from the parish. She was actually excommunicated for waving hello to Mr. Brandt, and because her father wanted to take her home. That's how this whole thing started. You may like or not like Mr. Brandt's sign, but they're completely legal, and there's no speech in it that was illegal of any sort. They tried to tell the police police, there was thousands of phone calls. I don't remember, hundreds. They couldn't prove that. There was a few voicemails of people who were disturbed by how they treated Miss Marissa, who, by the way, is probably one of the few minority students who goes there. She's half African American and half Hispanic, and she was there on a scholarship, and they took her scholarship away. So this little girl, because of some speech, was out on the street. This was the reasonable school, the reasonable victims of this case, and this is why I find it so disturbing. So that's what started the whole thing. Mr. Brand made one phone call. They may not have liked the phone call. Then it's up to them if they like it or not. There was no threats. The only thing he said was there's going to be demonstration, which is legal activity. Everything he did was legal. They signed a warrant for Mr. Brandt the morning of a protest, because of the protests, and the protests are perfectly legal in front of the school. And in fact, the people from the school were violent with the protesters, throwing things at them right in front of the police, and the police did nothing. But then they arrested Mr. Brandt on a warrant, and he wasn't even there at the protest. And this is why he was convicted. I don't really understand it, Judge. I don't think there's sufficient evidence to uphold this conviction. And I think the court should we should really renew our motion for judgment of acquittal. I mean, before it goes to an appeal, because I think this is one of the most absurd results, an unjust result. Just because people don't like the style or content of his speech, but he has a perfectly legal right to say it, utter it, show it, and that's why we're here today. And Mr. Brandt, as I said before, and the other case is the other case, Judge. And Mr. Brandt, I mean, I think he'll tell you himself, he was genuinely apologetic about his actions in that matter. And that's another case. The district attorney wants to raise that case up to try and blacken Mr. Brandt's name here. And they should be talking about this case. They should. There's apples and oranges. Mr. Brandt was actually working. He was actually advocating for someone other than himself, as I said, as he was in the other case, actually, Judge. He was advocating for this young girl who was expelled for some ridiculous pretext because they didn't like Mr. Brandt's sign. That's what it comes down to. They didn't like Mr. Brandt's sign, so this girl, little girl, is the one who had to accept be punished. Mr. Brandt didn't protest in front of the school. He just made one phone call, and somehow there was no instruction on complicity or conspiracy, but somehow they ratcheted that up into a conviction, which I think is unfortunate and perhaps without foundation. Mr. Brandt is a free speech advocate. He's unapologetic about it. And I think in this case, he will tell you that he thinks that his actions were justified. I mean, the tone or the manner may not be tasteful to some people, but that's an individual thing. I mean, it's not a question of him being unlawful. And Judge, we're asking that you set aside this conviction, or in the alternative, you give him the minimum sentence, because this is something which I think is very disturbing. And I think if this goes unchallenged, that it will set a very bad precedent for people who want to speak their minds and people who protest.
Mr. Brandt, would you like to make a statement to the court?
I think I should reserve my statement until after anybody else has spoken, Your Honor.
And Judge, I know there's a Joe Velasquez who wanted to speak, and Mr. Brandt may know better than myself other people who want to make comments.
Well, as the court has indicated, this court has had an opportunity to read dozens of letters of support on behalf of Mr. Brandt. I would like to hear from Mr. Velasquez. He's was one of the parties in this particular incident. And I will hear three other character witnesses, if they are present, that want to speak on behalf of Mr. Brandt. I'm going to limit their time to 3 minutes. So, Mr. Velasquez, I'd like to hear from you. Mr. Velasquez? Okay. Good afternoon, Ms. Velasquez. I can see you on the video. You can see me. I'd like to hear what you'd like to say regarding Mr. Brent.
Well, Your Honor, it goes back a little bit further than that. I've been taking care of Marissa since she was a baby, and she was in a school, public school, prior to this, going to this Catholic school. And she was, I pulled her out of the school because she was called the nigger, and the school refused to do anything about it. So I sent her to a Catholic school, hoping that I could find some kind of relief or some kind of safety for her, because she's biracial. And it was a hard time trying to find another school for her. And then when I did, she stayed there for 2 years, and she was one of the most loved kids there. Since I'm a passionate person and I really love this kid and I would do anything for her, I was accused of being a little bit over aggressive in the school for like cheering at the basketball games or cheering at the volleyball games because I'm a loud person. I would get looked or viewed wrong, and I got the wrong. Everybody took the wrong impression about me. So the day of incident, when this happened at the school, about 2 days prior to that, Miss Hubble told me that there would never ever be an instance that I would ever have to take that child out of that school because of the circumstances of her life over the years. And I was really appreciative of that. And I told Miss Hubble what I was doing. I was at a car accident one time, videoing the accident and saving some of the video for the one of the parents in the parish, because she was involved in the accident at the school. They kind of knew that I was more like a different person now, that I was an activist or just a video person, right? So the day of the incident, she took offense to that. She didn't. She knew that I was going to videotape her, and she told me on the phone that I ruined her education. It wasn't Eric. It wasn't Marissa. It was me. They did it because of me. So the only person suffering or had to suffer is me. You know, poor Marissa, we had to leave the state and leave the city and move to another place because I've received threats at my house. I received threats in the community. I received, I don't get looked at, or I can't go to my church in my community. It's been hard on me, sir. I've had the most difficult time suffering from this because of the teachers. You know what I mean? They didn't have to. They could have just let me get in my car and leave. We weren't protesting that school that day. It had nothing to do with them. But they took it upon themselves to initiate the response they did. We didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for this, and I don't